All right, so it's been a minute since I've done one of these, but just wanted to throw a quick video together here, touching on what I believe to be the essential traits for an effective coach. And some of this will speak to my peer group and younger strength coaches, but then also too for sport coaches, parents, and athletes. Kind of what to look for, what to identify in a coach. And the first thing that comes to mind for me is authenticity and objectivity. So how do they act or behave in front of parents versus athletes, or in the case of strength coaches, around their coworkers versus in front of their athletes? Is there a dramatic difference between these things? I think with the coaching world, a lot of the times people get wrapped up in the mantra or the persona of who they believe they need to present themselves as. And I think that the farther that you drift away from who you organically and authentically are, the more full of shit you are, and probably the less valuable you really are. But the second point is educational acumen, or in other words, does this coach have the ability to actually teach people, teach athletes? Whether we're talking about the strength and conditioning side or we're talking about the sport side, I've always looked at a coaching endeavor as being a teaching obligation. We are trying to get athletes and people to do things that they aren't able to perform on their own or without guidance. So for that reason, we have to be the ones that are able to teach and educate our athletes on not just how to do something, but why it's significant, and then have really, a purpose or an intent behind our actions. I think a lot of the times coaching becomes, this game of charades where it's just them trying to show how much of a mastermind they are. But really, if those points aren't being received well, then what you're doing isn't really worth anything. And that leads into the third trait, which is the one-to-one feedback philosophy. So for my sake, I've always looked at it as, I want to try to be as close to one-to-one for positive reinforcement versus negative reinforcement. And that ties back into the objectivity point mentioned earlier. But with coaching, and especially in football, and especially, with strength and conditioning, it's really been bastardized as being this authoritarian role where we're in charge and everybody's going to be at our feet and we're going to just make all the calls, and everybody's going to follow orders. And that's just not the case, man. It's a really poor way of going about it. I want to make sure that if somebody does something good, I want to acknowledge that and be complimentary to that, to reinforce that part of it. Whereas when somebody does something that we don't want to see, addressing that equally, but then also doing so with a purpose where there's some kind of meaningful contribution or input that follows the negative feedback. We want to try to get them better. We're not trying to just prove a point with everything that we're doing or saying to them. For the fourth trait that I look for, do they evolve? Are they doing the same shit in 2023 that they were doing in 2013? Are they able to kind of understand how the dynamics of sport or of human performance and strength and conditioning are changing as time goes on? And are they not only aware of it, but are they receptive to that and then putting it into practice in their way or how it applies to that context? I think the number one evaluator for any coach, for any endeavor, is being able to provide true justification or explanation as to why they are doing what they are doing. And normally, in most cases, you'll get a lot of coaches that just have this same auto loop of why they do what they do and what those purposes or principles are. And I think that, with what we're seeing and experiencing now with the evolutions of kids and athletes, is that, coaches are having to kind of change the way that they go about some things. So if we still have this crop of coaches that just refuses to adapt to, how things are now, or with new information coming out, then that's just somebody that's just not really worth a shit. They need to do better, or take more ownership in what they do and how they go about that. And that leads me right into my last point, which, I kind of tied a couple of words together here. But, for the fifth trait, I'm looking at their ability to be adaptive, empathetic, and then versatile to the situation. And a lot of those, or all of those, really are kind of embedded by self-awareness. And are we able to honestly and objectively evaluate ourselves without bias, which is very difficult to do, so that we can have a good barometer or metric for how we are actually growing and showing improvement. So for coaches, you want to make sure that you're attaching yourself or associating yourself with people who are forward thinking. They're constantly challenging and really evaluating their own methodology, their own principles, their own belief systems, and then taking in information and genuinely using that, to the best of their ability to help evolve and form what their coaching practices and philosophies are.